to prepare for a fast-changing world, it might be useful to look a little bit about how the world has changed recently, to glimpse a little bit of what it might look like going into the future, and perhaps for a moment, just think about those things we can do to change our habits and behaviors in preparation for that fast-changing world. Now, we tend to think that the world is either changing quite quickly now and will be changing, but it's changed quite a lot in the last 10 years. I think if I asked you what the world looked like BG, before Google, you'd have to think. Google became a verb in 2006. 2006 was also the year in which we had the birth of Twitter. Now, I'm not sure I know yet exactly what to do with Twitter. The American president seems to think he knows what to do with it. And just in the last few months, a museum for the president, this is Trump, for his Twitters opened in New York, started by our own Trevor Noah, just to give you a feel. So if you think about that, that wasn't even here a bare 10 years ago. The next big thing that hit us was the iPhone. I think we'd need to consider what the next big invention is going to be that influence our lives as much as the iPhone has done, as much as that digital world has done for us. And if you think about the iPhone, let's think a little bit about what it's done to change our day-to-day lives. Airbnb, a hotel and accommodation group with no bricks and mortar, started in 2008. And just the year thereafter, Uber, a taxi company, without any taxis, started as well, which gives you a little bit of an idea of what that world looks like. But I think on the other hand, and in line with that, and that view of technology, and at the same time, around 2010, people living in cities, urban dwellers, became the largest population on the globe. And Google prototyped their first driverless car. And if you think about it, there's also a shift in terms of economies. China became the world's largest manufacturing nation, bigger than the USA. And the scariest part is the global population surpassed 7 billion. Now, we'll talk a little bit about when the next billion will be, and that's very close by. But let's also think a little bit about technology and what's disappeared. I see George Bezos said yesterday that he thinks Amazon could fail in the next 20 years. This is the world's biggest company. Well, let's talk about some of those companies. Kodak failed in 2011 after they had developed and invented digital photography. Let's think about a few others. Who of you remember Blockbusters? The guys who you went to go and rent VHS videos, we spoke about that earlier, or DVDs, and then you had Netflix who did the revolutionary thing about posting that to you, and now that's being streamed to you. And they have over 6,500 titles and a few thousand movies that they stream to us every day. But I think the scariest part is something else. So, quite recently, Google's DeepMind, which is a big computer, played against the world champion of Go. Now, Go is a very complex 2,500-year-old game, and it beat the world champion with a set of moves that he and nobody else in the world had ever seen before. So let's just see how they did that. The Google engineers didn't write an algorithm. They helped the computer to learn by itself, teach it how to play the game, and ultimately did that by thinking on its own. And I think that's a little bit scary. So let's get a little bit back to the fun part. If you remember, just a few years ago, 2016, we had an election in the US, which was deeply influenced by robots, psychology, other types of bots, and mostly Facebook. And a word like fake news is now part and parcel of our lexicon. In that world, I think disruption and innovation has swept away most of those old ways. And we need to think a little bit about where we are within that world and where we want to belong. So I want to talk a little bit about speed and borrow from Thomas Friedman. It's not only that there will be change, it's definitely about the speed thereof. And what we're talking about is exponential change at a speed that we've not really experienced before. And let's just look at two areas around that. The one is around computing. And I think we're at a stage now where technology will leave nothing untouched. The speed between a new breakthrough and it coming to market will decrease continuously, and to a point where it will become free. Just think about those things that you have free now from a technology point of view. I want to think a little bit about automation. So I don't know how much you think about the types of robotics and artificial intelligence, but let's stand still with a few. Firstly, a type of assisted robotics and artificial intelligence. The ones where we take processes, say a call center, and automate parts of it, robotics process automation. I think that's a good start, and that's where we are now. But what about the next piece? Where we fully augment what humans do, or let's put it the other way around, let's augment what robots do with humans, and where we already have medical doctors undertaking medical procedures in Pretoria, making use of those robots. I think the last one is a little bit around autonomous robotics and artificial intelligence, which is a little bit like Google's DeepMind, where computers start thinking for themselves. And what happens in that world? Does it mean, on the one hand, that the world becomes a place just filled with technology, or is the converse true? And perhaps to a degree, and counterintuitively, is that when human traits become important again? Is it when emotional intelligence, creativity, and innovation become as valuable as the technology? And I want us to think a little bit just on the humorous side. Spreadsheets that was not the end of accountants. In fact, there are more of them now than there were then. As much as ATMs was not the end of bank tellers or clerks. It doesn't mean that when we embark on these new innovations that everything we know will just disappear. It will, however, change substantially. I find that piece interesting, but what I find sometimes alarming and a little bit more scary is what happens to people. So what happens in a world where people my age or younger, let's say people born in 2007, the chances that they'll reach the age of 100 or more is probably in excess of 50%. What does work look like? Where you have people who are 80 working with people that are 20. Never mind millennials, probably the most over-surveyed, most medicated group. What does Gen Z look like together with an 80-year-old, which is soon? And just by the way, 65-year-olds are probably the largest population group in the world. So I just want to quickly stand still at 3 areas. So if we think about the world from 4 scenarios, connected between individualism and collectivism on the one hand, between integration and fragmentation, there's 4. A blue world in which corporates almost turn into mini states and they really take a prominent role in society. A green world where the social and environmental agenda forces substantial change. A yellow world where humans come first, and a red world where innovation outpaces regulation. Just a little bit, what does that red world look like? It's a world where a small number of pivotal people get the highest rewards, where like-minded workers come together and gravitate to do technology and build new bubbles of innovation, where digital platforms give them an outside reach to all of us and the globe. What does it look like from a brew world? Sometimes a quite scary one. Big company capitalism rules. Human effort might be maximized through sophisticated and physical and medical enhancements and technology. I'm sure in this world the rewards are high, but the price that people pay would be their data. Data used to predict and anticipate performance and risk. I want to talk a little bit about a green world. This is a world in which corporate responsibility is not a nice to have. It's a business imperative. It's a world where workers are attracted by organizations they really admire and can feel in tune with. And the idea of job for life moves back into our lexicon. And then lastly, I want to talk about the world that probably resonates with me most, is a yellow world. A world that's about humanness, about fairness, where there's a strong emphasis on ethics and society. Now, I would think most organizations wouldn't be just one of those, wouldn't be one of the 4, it'd probably be a kind of combination. And what I think is useful is to think where you might fit into one of those worlds. Think which ones of those best represent you. And you might ask, was I born this way? Was I taught this way? Or is it kind of a way that I've experienced myself into? I hope that you've thought about those, 1 or 2 of those, see what resonates for you, because we'll talk a little bit, so what can you do? And I think there's a few things. You can act now. Doing it later than now is just too late. 2, I think you should put some money on the table, make a bet, and a kind of no regrets bet. Start doing something. And if you thought about taking a leap, make that a leap further. But most importantly, for you and your organization, start building a story so that automation and robotics doesn't happen to you, but you become an author of that story. And I think then most importantly, and lastly, let's protect people and not jobs. Let's nurture agility, adaptability, and future-proof our people. Thank you.